Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started tonight. My name is Sarah Lentz. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm chair of the board here in Portland. I also am a mom to a 9-year-old who goes to Ocean Avenue. And I am excited to be hosting this third session tonight about what has been happening with the attendance boundaries work in the district. So, in just a little bit, we'll ask you to use this QR code, but it's really important that through this conversation and afterwards that the community is able to give us really in-depth feedback about the presentation that you'll see tonight and any questions or concerns that you have. Really quickly, I would love to just do introductions of folks that are on the screen. So we have Superintendent Scallon, we have Dr. Valenzuela, we have Dr. Ahmed, we have some members of the committee that have been working together since last fall. So we have Ariel and Rob and Priscilla. Priscilla also works within the district as our McKinney-Vento liaison and works with students who are experiencing homelessness. I think we might also have a Colby and a Zoe who are from our multilingual team and do a ton on the back end to support all these events. So just super grateful that they're here tonight. And Superintendent Scallon, could you go to the next slide? Perfect. So tonight we have these 5 parts to talk through, and I'll start with a background on the committee and how it came to be and the process that it's been involved in so far. And then we will look at a final draft, and this is the first time I'll say this tonight, but it won't be the last. That everything that we're going to be looking at today is nothing is final. No decisions have been made for implementation. Everything is really in still very much a working process and won't be decided for quite some time, which we'll get more into detail in a bit. Then we'll also be asking folks that are here on the call for feedback around some middle school work that we're engaging in, and then we'll put kind of like all these pieces together to look at the long-term timeline and what we can expect after these community meetings have finished. So, and just so folks know, there is a Q&A function that you can use tonight. So if you have questions along the way, you can put questions in that Q&A and we will try to answer them as we go through. So with that, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. This is the vision and mission of the Portland Public Schools. And this is something that we read every time we have a board meeting. And it is really considering or really trying to set our North Star, or the thing that we are always focused on no matter what. So in the Portland Public Schools, we are responsible for ensuring a challenging, relevant, and joyful education that empowers every learner to make a difference in the world. We build relationships among families, educators, and the community to promote the healthy development and academic achievement of every learner. So that is the mission of the Portland Public Schools, and everything that we're going to be talking about tonight is focused on achieving this mission. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Beautiful. So Dr. Scallon, who is here on this call with us and will probably contribute in just a bit, after he came into the district, we started a really rigorous strategic planning process. Our last strategic plan, called the Portland Promise, had come to the end of its lifespan, and we needed to create a new strategic plan. And throughout that planning, which involved the board, involved community, staff, students across the district, the board started to notice some patterns that were taking place within our elementary and middle schools. And as that strategic planning process came to an end, the board decided to have a resolution that would address some of those patterns and disparities that we were seeing or disproportionalities that we were seeing in some of our schools. So that resolution in 2024 named these bullets. So to determine if elementary and middle school boundaries should be adjusted to help us promote equity and achievement, to determine how boundaries should be adjusted and make a recommendation to the board, to determine if changes should be made to the middle school model based on current and future enrollment, and to identify any projects, policies, or challenges that may also need to be addressed by the board and the strategic plan. And then the committee that was called for to be made during this resolution would then submit recommendations to the board for action. And you might be asking yourself, well, what were the patterns or the disproportionalities that we were seeing that the board wanted to address? And we've got some examples of those on the next page. Next slide. Oh, I'm not quite to the next slide. So before we get to the next slide, these are the members of the committee that the board's resolution asked us to create. And anytime the board creates a committee, we try to do that in a way that brings as many experiences and backgrounds into one body as possible. So in this committee list, you'll see alumni, you'll see a current student, you'll see someone that works in the transportation department, you'll see parents, community members, really trying to round out this community, because especially when we're looking at boundaries or something that goes across the whole district, we want as much experience as possible to inform the best solutions. So I think now is the slide that I think that we are going to go to. Go ahead, Brian. Oh, I didn't. Okay. Sorry about that. But as we start looking at the numbers and things that we saw in the elementary and middle schools, there are some words that will come up as we get into this. And here are 4 words that we think it's helpful to just have definitions for as we move into the rest of this presentation. So the first one is functional capacity, which is the capacity in a school based on the number of students that should be in each classroom. The calculation is completed after setting aside classrooms for art, music, gym, STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, and special education. That also includes things like the cafeteria and other like specialized programs that might be in existence in the school. The second word that we'll talk a lot about tonight is resident students. So it's students who live in the city, and it's students who have addresses outside of Portland are excluded. So in Portland, we actually have a fair amount of students that transfer into this district from other places to attend the Portland Public Schools. But as we start to look at numbers, it'll just be important for you to note that those students are not included. And then to get kind of like the utilization of a school, so kind of like how full it is, we look at something that is the resident students divided by the functional capacity. And that's what we call utilization. And that will be on some of the slides that we look at in a bit. And finally, we have the term economically disadvantaged, which is students that are, their household is at or below 185% of the federal poverty level. So those are the words that you'll see come up tonight as we move through the slides. So now we can go to the next slide. Perfect. And here's the slide I already had in my brain. So this is a list of our elementary schools here, and you'll see kind of to the right of that chart, you'll see some examples of the disproportionalities that we were seeing within our elementary schools. So you'll see that there's a 53 percentage point difference in the number of economically disadvantaged students between East End and Longfellow. There is a 23% point difference in building utilization between Longfellow and Lyseth. And those are not the only two, but they are examples. And we also see similar things at our middle school level. So we can go to the next slide. You'll see there that there's a 12 percentage point difference in building utilization between King and Moore, and then a 25% point difference in economically disadvantaged students between King and Moore as well. We don't have an ability to talk back and forth with each other in the format that this is set up with. But in the last couple of sessions, I've asked the audience to think about, like, how do you think that these disproportionalities might impact the schools and the district? And some of the things that have come up is the way that resources are allocated through the district could be impacted. So for a school who has a lower utilization rate, they will not have as many staff in that school because they don't have as many students in that school, which means that they could potentially lose out on programs or opportunity within that school. On the other end of that, a school that has a really high utilization number is going to have a lot of students and a lot of their spaces, and it might feel different, or there might be a bigger concentration of challenges that our schools interact with and support. So those are a couple of examples. And then another thing that was brought up that I thought was really helpful, and that was a social worker who works in a number of our schools, how she noticed that in a school where perhaps there was not as many economically disadvantaged students, that students hadn't had opportunities to talk to other peers who had like vastly different experiences than those that they held themselves. So there was, just differences in the students because they hadn't had that opportunity to really interface with the diversity that exists within some of our other schools. So these are the things that we started to note. Yeah, that's a great question that just came up. The percentage of economically disadvantaged students district-wide, I believe it's, does anyone know the exact number off the top of their head that could share that? I don't know, Dr. Valenzuela, if you have that. I think it's underreported right now because we get that number through the free and reduced lunch paperwork. And after Maine made free lunch for everyone all the time, which is awesome, and free breakfast, the incentive to do the paperwork went down. So we've done a good job of getting that paperwork in, but it's a little bit under. I'm going to see. We'll get that answer to you, but it's
between 50 and 60%.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to guess, but I just didn't want to say it out loud unless it was right. And the second part of your question, Emily, about the optimal utilization rate, it differs a little bit at each level of school. And in the elementary school, having an utilization rate around 80% is kind of common, and between 80 and 90% is like what is seen. And Dr. Scallon, do you remember what it is for the middle school rate, or anybody from the committee? It's a little bit lower, if I remember correctly.
So actually,
or higher.
It's actually higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so because the actual utilization that you're using is around 80% of what you would see in utilization because of teachers having planning periods and kids shuffling classes perhaps. And so you can actually see a higher percent there.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. And great question and good use of the Q&A. So if other folks have questions, please feel free to put them in there. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So that is kind of the things that we were looking at as we got together as a committee. And one of our first meetings, the committee was charged with creating a set of priorities or principles, if you will, that would guide our decision making through this process. And part of this, I think part of creating these priorities is really also just acknowledging that moving boundaries or moving schools is an incredibly personal and sometimes emotional experience for kids and their families. And just in acknowledging that, it felt important to put some guardrails on what we will and won't consider during this process to really try to minimize the impact across the district, while being able to better balance utilization and some demographics. So you'll see that these are our priorities, and they are not um, in weighted order by any means. They're a body of priorities that we use together, and there's not one that's more important than another. And you'll also see, kind of, if you go back and watch any of our committee meetings, that often they are in tension with each other. And to get closer to one, we have to give up something in another category. So these are the five priorities. So trying to balance the building utilization, taking a district-wide perspective by considering socioeconomic, linguistic, and racial diversity within and across schools, trying to maintain neighborhood schools as much as possible, which basically means a school, and this is the definition that the committee decided on, is a school that is like within walkable distance of your house, that you could utilize even if you weren't going to school there. You could still go and use the playground, and it would be an easy kind of place to utilize. To consider transportation, so limiting the amount of time required on a bus or walking, and then trying to really minimize impacts on students. So thinking about what is the least amount of students that we can move or impact, especially siblings and neighbors. And since we do have a couple of committee members here, I don't know if there's anything that anybody would add. If that's the case, you can come off mute. Okay, I see Ariel shaking her head. Rob, I don't see your face, but if you want to say anything, you can just come off. Oh, and there's Lauren too, and Priscilla. Great. Okay, thank you. Beautiful. So we can go to our next slide. And like I said, this is a very, very long process. When we first engaged in this process, the timeline was to get the board recommendations in time to fold it into this year's budget process. As we got into the process, we discovered that there was a lot of data that was incorrect, that needed to be correct before we could really have an accurate picture of the enrollment and student population across the city. And it felt important to get that foundation right before we built on that. So we slowed the process down. And right now we are kind of between 5 and 6 right now is what I would say. Yeah, thank you. And here's this animation that comes in that shows kind of where we are and where we're going. So after this engagement, these sessions, we start to look at 5 and 10-year enrollment projections. And then this fall, we'll actually have another round of community engagement opportunities where folks can see how the work has progressed over the summer and give more feedback. Once we get a set of scenarios that have been incorporated the community feedback, then the committee will be charged with creating an implementation plan. So again, nothing has been officially decided. There is no right now implementation plan for when any decisions will be implemented. That will come in the fall, and it is possible that decisions could be staggered out. So any changes that happen at the elementary level could happen first and then followed by middle school, or vice versa. There's a lot of permutations that might happen, and we just don't know yet. But once that series of recommendations is together, that would get sent to the board, and then the board will either approve them, amend them, or deny them. So those are our options, and this is kind of where we are in the process. All right, we can move to the next one. And these are just a couple of things around the implementation that we want to just make sure that we are named or naming. To go back to, this is a big deal that will impact families, and I think it's important for everybody to know that nothing is going to happen in this next school year, and that any new boundaries, the earliest they would start is 2026, the fall of 2026. Um, and like I mentioned before, in that implementation, things that will be considered are, if a student is in fourth grade, do they finish their fifth grade year before they, would need to change? How are siblings treated? Those kinds of things are all things that will be considered in the implementation plan. Next. Great. And so this next piece that we're going to look at is a final, and notice the quotes, there's a final draft for our elementary school scenario. And again, this is a working draft that we are bringing to the community to just get feedback on. And we have been working with a professional demographer and consultant company who has helped us look at all of this data and build maps and adjust maps. And the committee has looked at multiple scenarios and has asked for revisions for those scenarios. But this one that we're going to look at tonight is the one where we have kind of like had some consensus around and felt like it was further enough along to bring to the community. And then as we got to that consensus, there were also several other decisions that the committee made that they're going to hold onto in this process. And here they are, which is the committee is not going to propose the closure of any elementary school based on strong community preference for neighborhood elementary schools. If folks lived in the district, have lived in the district for some time, you'll know around 2018, there was a financial demand that asked the district then to look at potentially closing elementary schools or reconfiguring grades from a K through 5 system to a K to 2 and 3 to 5 system. And the community during that time, and within this process as well, has largely said that that is not something that there's appetite for. And I think right now we don't have the same pressures that we did financially in 2018. So the committee has decided we're not going to consider closing an elementary school. And the committee has also said that they're not going to propose changing the grade configurations based on the preference that exists. However, there is a caveat that, if enrollment projections change drastically or budget projections change drastically, we, may have to review that again. And just to name, I think federally there are, the environment is very different financially, and there's some funding that it's not always guaranteed. So we're just watching that, and if it impacts us, then we'll have to come back to this conversation. But right now, these are the things that the committee has gotten consensus around. All right, next slide. Great. So what we're going to do now is actually ask you, hopefully, to be able to access this website on your computer or phone. So it's bit.ly/PPS June 2025. And that second part is all one word. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Scallon here, and let's see if there's any way that we can get that link in the any kind of chat or question, but maybe not. Yeah, it's case sensitive. Thank you, Ariel, for mentioning that. And Superintendent Scallon, if you want to pull it up and walk people through what they're going to be seeing there, that would be awesome.
There we go. So can you see it? Yep,
Yes,
great.
I can see it,
So
but I also see a hand in the audience really quick. Kate Kessler, did you want to talk, or did you have a question, or did you get it sorted?
we make sure that Kate is unmuted.
Yes, I don't have the power.
She does. Yeah. Kate, it looks like you can talk. We can't hear you if you're talking.
Ah, yes, we just need to re-share the link. So can we share the link in the Q&A for the
Yep.
bit.ly? Okay, hold on 1 second and I will just type it in. Awesome. Okay.
Great. Thank you for that. Um, when you access that bit.ly, you'll be able to zoom in and see this PDF packet that shows you the draft scenario, which we're calling elementary school boundaries scenario 4. What you see here is the overall view of that scenario. The black lines indicate current elementary school boundaries. The slashes indicate where a neighborhood or a set of houses is potentially moving from one school to another. If I scroll down on the second page, you can see that same table that Chair Lentz was looking at a couple of minutes ago that walked through the functional capacity, student residence utilization, and percent economically disadvantaged for our current boundaries. And you can see how they change in scenario 4. And so you can see where, for this example, East End goes down 5.3% utilization, which means that there are fewer students than there were in the current boundaries. So you can see that in this on page 2. On page 3, this chart shows you the current students, the current resident students, meaning those who live in Portland, that would be impacted by the proposed adjustments. And this shows you that 66 students that are currently at Ocean Ave would go to Longfellow in this proposal. That's the way to read this. So current school is going down and new school is going across. And then the remaining pages are all zoom ins that allow you to see East End and each subsequent school, their boundaries. And so you can see them there. And so, Chair, if you want, I can sort of pull this down and give people a minute to look through it.
Yeah, I think that would be great. There's a lot of information in there, so feel free to put a question in the Q&A if you need something repeated or you're not sure what something is on a map. Beautiful. And now we're going to put up a slide that just has some questions to kind of think through as you are looking at the map. So Superintendent, whenever you're ready to put that back up, that would be great. Great. So as you're looking at that map and the numbers, what we would love for you to think about, and if you want to do this right now, you can use the QR code that's up here to enter your thoughts, or we can share them out loud here and they'll be, we'll take some notes and record them that way. But we will have a few minutes to just think about, like, what are the positives that you see from this scenario? What are the concerns that you see? Any adjustments that you would recommend based on what you know about where you live or other neighborhoods in Portland? And is there anything else that's coming up for you as you look at this map and the numbers? So I'd love to open the floor now. If you want to, you can put a comment in the Q&A or you can raise your hand and we'll invite you to speak out loud. And also, if there are just questions that you have about what you're seeing or this the process, this is also a good time for that as well. Yes. Could we share the actual QR link? Someone's having a hard time sharing it in there or scanning it with their phone. Yeah, it's hard to scan on a computer screen.
I can.
Yes.
Just give me a second because I need to pull it down.
Yeah,
Oh, actually, it's oh, let me go
we
back.
might have it on a different slide, I think.
It is. That's
Yeah.
this way. Pull back. Come on. There we go. It is right here. We're trying to expand on all of our ways to shrink URLs. So it is thetinyurl.com/PPS boundaries.
I'm gonna type that into the Q&A so folks can get it there if they need to. Okay, so I think we could go back to that series of questions when you can. Perfect. So what are people thinking about what they see here, either in the numbers or on the maps? And again, you can raise your Zoom hand or you can put a thought in the Q&A. But it is really helpful to hear from you and what you're thinking because it will help us make better scenarios moving forward. Yeah, that's a great. So there's a question that just came in the chat about transportation, and then I'll jump back to Emily's question. Yes, so over the course of this process, the committee has learned about all kinds of different layers of information that go into boundaries. So transportation, where the buses run, where are our crossing guards, where is what we call a safety zone, which is where kids are safe to walk. So the boundaries take into consideration that we don't want kids, having to cross major roads if there's not a crossing guard there. So there's a lot of different levels of information that feed into this. And one of the on the can we go back to the slide that has the two maps, the current and the proposed version? I think it's just a couple back. Yeah, so if you look at the map on the left-hand side, that's the map of the current boundaries. Towards the middle of that colored section, you'll see like squiggly black lines. And so our boundaries haven't been updated in over a decade. And over time, we've had to make adjustments for transportation and other factors that have changed the boundaries like one-off. But it has ended up creating kind of these squiggly boundaries that, like, when you look at them, don't make a lot of sense unless you kind of like know the detail underneath. So part of what this scenario does is adjust for that and try to make cleaner, more logical lines that are easier to kind of like both interpret as a community member, but then also just are more codified for transportation. And in terms of like major impacts or benefits, I am not sure that I don't know if there's any major benefits, but it all makes sense for transportation, if that makes sense. And next, another question, what are the heavy black lines in the current boundaries? Superintendent Scallon, can you answer that?
Middle schools.
Thank you. Yes. So the big black lines here on the left-hand side are the middle school boundaries. Again, you'll see kind of like some weird squiggly things taking place there. Let's see. Will kids also be walkable to neighbors who go to the same school? At the moment, we're districted for Row, while in front and behind us are Ocean Ave. So someone else in this house might go to row. Um, so we are looking at all of those different permutations of and the other piece to this, the other another layer is that there is the boundaries that we draw, and then there's also the policies that are in place that help determine where our students go to school. So like you mentioned, Emily, some families ask for a transfer to go to a different school than where they currently reside, and we're able to accommodate that in some cases. Another example is around McKinney-Vento students. They may not necessarily go to the school that is within the district of or within the boundary of where they reside, because we have to, we want to make sure that they're in a school that can support them and give the services that they need. So that is another piece that will be part of the recommendations that go to the board if there's any policy changes that need to be changed to, again, try to keep that impact as small as possible. And the committee, and I don't know if anybody on the committee would want to speak to kind of like how the committee has wrestled with that impact and the ways that we've thought about trying to keep kids together or not. Is there anybody on the committee that would like to speak to that?
I'm not sure I have a ton to add. Just that we have folks on the committee from all over the city. So we've really kind of gotten into the nitty-gritty of, oh, this geographic area, this neighborhood, these are things that folks have given input on about what might make sense. And we've talked about things like where are there major streets that it wouldn't be great for kids to have to cross, or we've just, yeah, I mean, we are mindful, as Sarah said, when talking about the priorities that we set at the beginning of the process. We've tried to be really mindful that every choice has trade-offs. So yeah, I don't know if that helps that much, but we've tried to be really thoughtful about all the priorities that are competing here.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks so much, Ariel. I think an example of that is we'll often look at a scenario and then make a recommendation to move a part of a neighborhood to a different school and adjust the boundary. And then the next time it comes back, we actually realize what that does to a neighborhood, and then we request to flip it back. So I do think that there's been a lot of interrogating of kind of like what is best for neighborhoods and kids that live next to each other. And awesome. Alex, I see your hand up. Can we let Alex ask their question? Beautiful. Whenever you're ready.
Hi, I was just wondering, it kind of looks like part of what was Reiki is now being split between Ocean and Longfellow, but is that going underneath is that the highway that they have to go past now to get to their elementary school?
Um, did Superintendent Scallon, do you want to respond to that one? I might have Alex repeat that question one more time just to make sure I've got the right area in mind.
You're
Could you
you're
say
talking
that?
about the area right here, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it does have them moving. Um, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. There are certain areas where the community changed or the color changed, and it actually doesn't have housing. Um, I can't speak to that specific area off the top of my head right now. It feels like a late night. Um, but there is part of that that is happening where, and that's one of the things that the committee is really wrestling with, is that this idea of walkability, right, where that may be walkable to Reiki. It's the same question here about this neighborhood, where we're trying to potentially add students to Presumpscot, but right now that is a easier walk to Lyseth. And so that is one of the pieces. But yes, you can see that this here has the highway cutting through right there.
Was Reiki full and that's why versus adding like more walkability places from Row?
Yeah, so and sorry, do you want to
No, go
respond,
ahead.
Ryan? I was just going to say, if we could go back, yeah, you're going to go back to the numbers. Beautiful. So right now, East End and Reiki are really high in their utilization in comparison to other students, and also have, high economically disadvantaged students. And so that is part of, as we were looking to balance schools, either that means that we have to put more students in to bring down that economically disadvantaged number, or move those students to someplace else at potentially a school that has lower numbers in there to help that balance. So that is the reasoning that you see those chunks specifically moved around. And I think the other challenge around that, though, is that both of those schools are on peninsula, which means that it makes transportation harder. That then, if we wanted to move students to a school that has a lower utilization, it means putting those kids on a longer bus route, because they wouldn't be able to walk, all the way off peninsula. And that is in conflict with the principles that the committee is working from. So it's a little bit tricky. So the scenario that you're seeing right now tries to do that to the best of its ability.
Yeah, that kind of flows into my other question, which was, if we have kids that are coming from a little bit farther, does that mean that all of the elementary schools might have like the same start time in this new plan? So people aren't maybe getting on a bus incredibly early in the morning to like access their elementary school.
Yes, so that is something that is being flagged in this process. And also in year 2 of the strategic plan, we're doing a really deep dive around transportation and everything around that, which includes, and you'll see this a little bit later, around potentially moving middle school to Metro, which would free up some buses to allow us to even out the morning start times, because we do know that there are some inequities that exist when we have that staggered start time for students in terms of who can use aftercare and who can't. And so that is in the works, and definitely part of this puzzle as we're putting it together.
Well, as someone that's been very much wanting that, I would just like to go on the record saying I am for the Metro for the middle school.
Yeah, and Alex, like, I really recommend, and everybody else that's on this call, like, please do use that form that's attached to the QR code to put that in there, because it's where, we're capturing just a lot of opinions from the community, and it will help drive that work.
Will do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I've got a question in the chat, and then we'll go to Emily, which is, there's still a large disparity in the percentage of economically disadvantaged students between schools. A 30% at Longfellow versus 76% at East End. Can you talk about how you made adjustments to try to balance the percentage of economically disadvantaged students, and why there's still such a disparity between schools? Hannah, that is like it is a really, really great question, and it is one that the committee has really been struggling with. And part of it goes back to where Reggie and East End are, and the students that go to those schools, and where we would need them to go to school to bring down that number. And it involves putting them on a bus and taking them across the city. And so it becomes a barrier in that way. So the committee has looked at several different permutations to try to drive that number down and decrease that disparity. And this is as far as we could get it without putting kids on buses for long amounts of time. And I don't know, Superintendent, if you would add anything else to that.
Yeah, just I thought that was great. Just like a little bit more is that socioeconomic is heavily neighborhood based. And so when the committee looked at evening out socioeconomic, what happened is you had islands where all of a sudden, I'm just seeing if my mouse shows up there, all of a sudden you'd have a group of kids from right over here that would get bused to East End, as an example. when they tried to balance utilization or balance socioeconomic. And so the trade-off there is perhaps lower the utilization at our schools that have higher socioeconomically disadvantaged students so that there's more staffing resources, basically, for the school and a smaller learning community than others. But the issue is just that socioeconomic is so neighborhood-based that you lose those other competing priorities of having a walkability and a neighborhood school.
Yeah. Just really appreciate you naming that. We're going to go to Emily, and then we're going to move on to middle schools. So Emily, if you want to come off of mute.
Sure. So
Okay.
I was going to speak when we were talking about the students who might have to cross over the highway, I assume by bus, to get to Longfellow or Ocean. And I just wanted to, and this was a discussion that started pre-pandemic, was about the walkability of the schools. And maybe this was already discussed, and because I joined the call late, and I apologize for that. It thinks I'm done talking, but I'm not. But anyway, we live what would have been walking distance to Nathan Clifford when we moved into our house, if anybody's familiar with that building. In the period of time, we were then moved to Ocean Ave, which then became a bus ride. And we met our community at the bus stop. So I think there was, at the 6 years ago or so when we started talking about this, there was this big fear that community isn't built unless you can walk to school. And we found almost the opposite, that everybody convened at the bus stop. And we met a lot of people that I think of multi-age, that sort of thing. So that, I think you do create community there. I think when the kids get to an age where they can walk to each other's houses, and how parents can rely on each other for childcare in a pinch and pick up my child from the bus, et cetera, that's where the neighborhood piece becomes very important. So we don't necessarily miss not being walkable to Ocean, but we would miss if we were on kind of a school island where all my child's peers were in a different elementary school, but were in the same neighborhood. So I just kind of wanted to, so the neighborhood community piece still really, yeah, it's a balance, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate you naming that, and just, kind of like another level of how to put this puzzle together. Let's go ahead and superintendent move to the middle schools. So with the middle school process, the committee really understands how the elementary scenario then feeds into the middle school scenario, and that they're very interconnected. But at this point, we haven't done enough around the middle school work to get to a working scenario that we felt like would be the one that we wanted to put in front of the community. And at this point, we have looked at a couple of different options around the middle schools, but haven't been able to zoom in the same ways and really get a scenario that most people are feeling confident about. One of the scenarios that we did look at in the committee around middle schools was the potential of decreasing from 3 middle schools to 2 middle schools. And part of the reason that our demographer brought that to the committee is because when you look at our middle schools, you'll see that the utilization rates are pretty low across the board, and that potentially there is a possibility to move 3 middle schools into 2 buildings. And we didn't look at that because we wanted to close a particular middle school. We looked at that so we could critically think about what it would mean to close a school in this process, which also got us to the consensus of saying, no, we're not going to touch any elementary schools. But this is a point that the committee is still looking at in terms of what makes the most sense for our middle schools. We also got some general information from our demographer who was able to say, because a lot of people are saying, well, if you closed a school, how much money would you save? And at the elementary school level, there would be about $1 million savings on an annual basis. At the middle school level, it's about $2 million. And at the high school level, I think we said it was about $2.5 million annually. And that doesn't come from cutting staff. That comes because if you have, 600 students, you still have to have spaces and teachers for all of those 600 students. But it comes from the building maintenance and the utilities and things like that. And so, right now, as I mentioned before, we don't have the same, a financial pressure to drive this to, say that we have to close a school. But we are coming to the community to see, how people think about the potential of decreasing to middle schools. I think one of the benefits of potentially doing that is that we could, right now we're not able to offer the same opportunities in all three middle schools. If we combine to two, could we increase what is available programmatically and otherwise within the two schools? So really, again, like I just want to say, there's no decision that has been made around this. It's just something that we are considering and thinking about. 2 nights ago, we actually had somebody that was on the last iteration of the Boundaries Committee and the one that happened 12 years ago. And they both said that this is a conversation that comes up anytime boundaries are looked at, because it's really important to just understand the reality of where we are and if we need to make any changes on that level. So these are the things that we're interested in getting feedback from. So is there a preference from the community of staying at 3 middle schools? How, as the committee moves into this work of looking at scenarios, should we be balancing that utilization, the school size, student demographics, and fewer elementary schools feeding into each middle school? That last piece, just an explanation on that. So like Ocean Ave Elementary School sends kids to all 3 middle schools. And so this cohort of 5th graders then gets split up and goes to different places. Some families really like that. Other families don't. And so it would be looking at creating a more streamlined feeder model so that less elementary schools feed into each middle school. So there's a question in the chat that I'll answer really quickly, which is there a slide that shows what would happen with the scenarios of closing each school? Yes, but it's not, they're available on the, I think, are they on the website? Yeah. So they're on the Portland Public Schools website, but there's not a scenario that anyone has endorsed yet, or there's no consensus around, but you can find those on the website. At the Portland Public Schools website, just the different scenarios that we've looked at. And another question that we're trying to answer, is it important to connect expeditionary learning schools? So for example, Presumpscot and King both use the same kind of like curriculum and model in their school. And is it important for one to feed into the other, or can they stand alone? And then the transportation piece that we talked about earlier. So right now in our middle schools, according to our policy, you have to live over 2 miles from a middle school or from your middle school to access district transportation, which if we think about 2 miles in the middle of winter, for a middle schooler, that is a lot of challenges and barriers to getting to their education. So I think I personally am hopeful that we can make a recommendation to bring that down and provide transportation to more students, but then also kind of the idea of using the metro for middle school. Which would, again, allow us to kind of even out school times, I think, and then, middle schoolers could get the benefits of having a metro pass, but there's also challenges that come in that as well. So I would love to, around this middle school topics and questions, if there's any questions or thoughts from the community members that are here, you can put them in the Q&A or raise your hand and we can answer any questions that you have. Great. Yeah, Alex, we can let Alex speak. Go ahead, Alex. There you go.
Thanks. Right now, my children are walkable to Lincoln. So if they were to possibly go to King instead, it would be the longer distance that you just mentioned. So I am for making the distance less than 2 miles, and also using the city bus for them to get there. I'm just wondering if the school board has talked to the Metro at all, if they have like any idea if like can they work with Metro to make maybe the morning run? Do they do anything for the high schoolers, or do the high schoolers just get on a route that's already established?
Superintendent, I feel like you probably have more details on that.
Yeah, so there has been conversations with Metro, but at such a preliminary stage at this point. And so it wouldn't be fair to like extrapolate that it's easily done or anything like that. But we have had conversations about what it would mean for start time and the fact that for Metro, they would need us to be slightly more staggered. Because right now our middle schools, I think, are off by 5 minutes. And they said that it would need to be closer to 20 minutes. And so that's the piece. They may need to add a couple of runs in targeted areas to be able to do it as well. But it wasn't an insurmountable piece for them. But it was so preliminary a discussion that too early to say more than that.
Mm-hmm. But I will say, Alex, that we've heard a lot from high schoolers who ride the metro that they feel like some of the routes that they are on, because they are just on routes that are public routes, that sometimes those feel very full. So the idea of putting middle schoolers on there as well with them, a lot of high schoolers have been like, we need more buses. So that's just anecdotal feedback that we're hearing from our students who ride the bus.
Okay.
Beautiful. And I know you answered this question in the chat, but I think it's worth repeating. How was it landed that Lincoln would close? And I just want to say again, like Lincoln is not closing. There was not, an agenda to close a school. It was a scenario that we were considering. And at the time, because of the location, Lincoln is in the middle. And so it was the school that we considered in the scenario. And also it has the lowest utilization. So that was the other reason. Any other thoughts or questions? I recognize it is 7 o'clock, so we'll go for a couple more minutes and then we'll close up. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay. Well, I really do encourage all of you to use that QR code or the link in the Q&A to fill out the form so that you can give us really any feedback. And last night someone asked, is everything on the table? And I said, yes. So really mention anything that's in your brain or your thoughts, and the committee will consider that. Also, please feel free to tell other people in your neighborhood and at your schools about this form, which will also be sent out. But, sometimes people will take it more seriously if they hear it from a friend. So please do that. Also, just a reminder, next Tuesday is Election Day and our budget is up on the ballot. So please vote yes for the budget and take your friends to the polls. We think it will be a low turnout election. So just really important that we show up to support the schools in that way. And with that, I think we'll close just about on time. I really appreciate all the committee members that are here and all the staff that are here. What is the process moving forward from here? Great question, Kate. So after this set of community conversations, the committee takes things back and re-looks at things while also moving that middle school scenario back together. Yeah, thanks. Superintendent moving that middle school scenario forward. And then we start to layer other things on top of it. So the 5-year plan, the 10-year enrollment projections, do they still hold up? We've also been in communication with the city about potential housing developments. How would that impact the scenario that we have consensus on? And then we'd make adjustments. In the fall, after school starts, we'll be doing another round of community engagement so you can see where the work is at that point. Then we'll take any feedback we get, incorporate it, build the implementation plan, and then get those recommendations to the board, who will hopefully be able to have a decision this fall, and then prepare any kind of plan and incorporate it into the budget in the next session or next season. So that is the plan. But at any time, if you have other questions about that, feel free to reach out to the board or the district, and we're happy to get you information that you need. But thank you so much for giving up a beautiful night to come and learn about this work, and we hope to see you very soon. Thank you all.